with a special announcement. So over to you, Fred.
You may notice here on the screen, we have, we've talked about, we had a meeting the other day where we talked about things we could do that, you know, to improve to how we do things, how we work. And one of the suggestions was to have some t-shirts made up. So if we do an ethical action or an event, we can all go and wear a lovely EHST t-shirt. And so we put an ace design team on this project, and they worked diligently for many, many hours and came up. We have two designs. This you may recognize is very similar to what's on our website. The board suggested this also. Our design team came up with an alternative, a little more lively, a little more colorful. So what we need to do, what we need to do is hear from you folks. We're probably going to make both of these shirts, but what we need to know is which shirts that you're interested in having. Do you want the women's style V-neck, a crew neck, and do you want a small, medium, or large, or all three, or extra large? So if you could send an email to the EHST group. I'm not sure which email address we should use. Chris will send an email out to the group. Respond to that at your earliest convenience, please. We do have some events coming up, the Poor People's Campaign in Washington. We have a number of members going. We'd love to get these things printed before then. So if you could do that at your earliest convenience, we'd appreciate it. And I will turn the program back over to Dorothy. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. I'm Dorothy Dale, one of the members of the board. You may have noticed we're trying something new this year. We're rotating the MC duties to try to lift the burden off of one person to be here week in, week out. Because of course, nobody's available week in, week out. So we're rotating the duties and we had a few little glitches at the beginning, but we think we're getting better at it. So that's why I'm up here today. It's my assigned duty. So welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society of the Triangle. Thank you for coming out to our meeting today. The Ethical Humanist Society promotes the use of reason and science in the search for and commitment to living an ethical life that benefits all humanity. We believe that personal inquiry, responsibility, and accountability are the best bases for ethical decision-making. Our weekly forums seek to broaden our understanding of ethics and human nature, and our congregational community encourages us to share diverse opinions, friendship, and camaraderie. We welcome everyone to share in our journey. If you would like more information about our communities, please let myself or Fred or any of our members actually know following the platform. And we also have a visitor sign-in sheet. So any visitors who are here, I hope that you've signed in so we can put you on your mailing list if you're open to that. And since we are a community, we take the beginning of our meeting to ask if there are any joys and concerns from our members and friends. Mike.
Well, wait.
Oh, and we're doing a hybrid meeting, so we always have to wait.
Friday is 2 days ago. And it's working. Anyway, what I mean is James Coley's died 4 years ago. A lot of things I wish I talked with him about, still miss him. I wish he were here. So that's what a loss. Okay, so that's what happened.
Thank you.
4 years ago now.
Is today the actual anniversary? It's June 3rd. Okay. Thank you for that.
You next.
Christina.
Hey. Yeah, I'm getting past the COVID. Got some shortness of breath, asthma stuff going on. So I'll be coughing for a while, but I'm no longer contagious. And then I'm getting surgery on Wednesday, so I'll be gone again for a couple weeks. I'll be back. So see you on Zoom.
Good to see you.
Remember to wash your hands after you touch the mic. Who is next?
Gretchen.
I have a very shocking event to report on that happened out my way on Wednesday. I was just coming home around 6 o'clock, coming down our gravel drive, Ravens Lane, and halfway down there was an SUV flipped over. A young man was trapped underneath. The other guys were around trying to jack it up. They were all the Hispanic workers who had been on the job laying the block for my niece's house all day in the heat. And somehow they flipped the car, and they had not called 911, whether they could or didn't think anybody'd understand them. They didn't speak English. And so I called 911, and luckily there was a sheriff just down the road a bit, and he was there within a couple minutes, and I was able to get around. I wouldn't have been any help there, so I drove away home, and the EMTs arrived probably pretty quickly, but the young man didn't make it. And all we can think is that, well, they had beer in the car, though the ones we found in the woods were still unopened. But they must have been tearing down that road. It's flat, it's not curvy, it's straight, a short gravel drive. They were maybe a little over a quarter of a mile down, and they managed to flip and roll the vehicle. And I think one of the guys that died, his brother was on the team, maybe other family members. They were a crew from High Point, but I think living locally while they were on the job. But no telling. We were told it was the driver, but who died, but maybe whoever was the driver decided not to say he was the driver. But it was very shocking. And Gretchen and Ben had just come to my house 15 minutes before I got home, and there was nothing going on. So sometime between 5:45 and 6, it happened. I must have been the first one there. But
Very sorry to hear
pretty
that.
horrendous, but it must have been pure negligence on the part of the driver.
Yeah.
So, and then I had a plumbing problem that night, and the plumber came and fixed it on Friday.
Yeah.
Another sad
Mike?
thing, I got a friend next door. He's really sick or not doing well, osteoporosis and other bad things. So he's at Signature, which is other side of the
Oh.
parking lot there. So I'll go see him after the meeting, and needs someone to take care of his cat. Do we have any cat lovers here who want to volunteer to maybe take a cat for a while? Come on by. We can look forward, because he may be not able to do a lot for the near future. So cat people, you could possibly take the cat or come take care of it at his place or figure something out. I'm doing it right now, but I can't go on. Anyway, that's the thing.
Okay.
Cat lovers unite.
Thanks, Mike. John? Stan?
Well, I have a concern. My wife has a condition that's been getting worse and worse. She can hardly walk now. And I'm the caregiver. You know, if she needs a glass of water, I get it for her. She's had an operation and it may get better, but it's a difficult situation for all of us, and it's hard to accept. She's angry a lot of the time about it, and it's something that's hard to get used to. So that's my life.
Sorry to hear that, Stan.
I just read that there's a documentary about Kurt Vonnegut that recently came out. So it's called Kurt Vonnegut Unstuck in Time. And it's supposed to be good. They say it's good. So I don't know where it is. You'd have to search if it's on Netflix or wherever, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Thank you.
I went online to buy some music by the artist that performed last week, and they're selling CDs and even a vinyl out of England. And there's a place in the West Coast that apparently will download digital files for you. There's technically have, I think the group name is
A different thread.
yeah, right. So that is available if you want it.
Fred.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I called Vera Har the other day. I wasn't able to get her on the phone, but I understand that she's still struggling from her back surgery. And so if any of you would like to help cheer her up or visit her or send her an email, we can maybe get her feeling a little better. So thank you.
Marge. Oh, wait for the mic.
I just wanted to tell you all that John and I both wrote to Senator Tillis and Burr. We heard back from Tillis, quite a lengthy reply, what he's doing about all the shootings. So they do respond.
I think we have a question, Marge, whether he actually is doing anything. Was there anything concrete?
He is part of a bipartisan group that is attempting to come up with some proposals, and my guess is it'll be as weak as it can possibly be. We'll see.
Okay.
Tom Tillis, our Senator.
Some of you know that I've been working really hard on every town group now so that we can pull so many people together to protest and talk about getting something done now and not giving up. And I've had a lot of really great responses. There is a June 11th march here in Raleigh. I think we sent that around that I'm planning to go to. I don't know if anyone else is, but I'd like to go together if we can. I wish we had our shirts, but we do have our other shirts. Yes. And then the thing that's been really good about it is every town, I've been looking at their whole schedule. It's in almost every city and some towns around our whole country. And it's an unfortunate timing on Thursday at 8 p.m., which is just when the hearings are started to be, public hearings are started from the January 6th committee. But at 8 p.m., there is a Zoom meeting of the North Carolina group to talk about what we could do and how we could do it and really put some more teeth into it than we already have. I think that's really good news. And I will send around the information. Unfortunately, they're sending it the morning of, but as soon as I get it on how to connect with Zoom, but if anybody's interested, I think it will be a really good meeting. So that to me, that's all good news about a really horrific subject.
Yeah, and because I have the podium, I'm going to make a couple of comments because they're on my mind. I have spent the last several years, becoming hyper partisan. Republican's a bad word. And I'm trying to consciously realize there are some heroes. And Liz Cheney, don't agree with her on much of anything, but she's a hero. And this guy in Buffalo, I spent my first working years in Buffalo, and I worked for an elected town clerk who was a Republican. You had to join the party and you had to go to the fundraiser, which I did. And I worked with a young man, a few years older than me, he was in his late 20s. And his ambition was to become a Republican operative of some sort. So he had been to like how to run a campaign school and all of that. And he told me early on that the cream rises to the top. And that really stuck with me because he truly believed that Republicans were Republicans because they were, the better. The cream rises to the top. People who are wealthy, it's because they're, whatever. But I still try to see those heroes. And the guy from Buffalo who just had all of his endorsements yanked, he's a Republican running for Congress for re-election, and he came out against assault rifles and he had all his endorsements yanked. That's how much things have changed. I mean, he's dropped out of the race. Because what's the point if the entire establishment? But anyway, so I'm just trying personally to remember there are heroes out there, and Republican heroes in particular need to be celebrated. Yeah, right.
I just want to add to that, Liz Cheney on the CBS morning show said that she thought the Republican Party was facing a moral crisis this year. And she urged, I'll just repeat this for the sake of the Zoom audience. Liz Cheney on CBS's Sunday morning program said that she thought the Republican Party was having a moral crisis. And then this year would determine largely the future of the Republican Party, whether it was led by conservative ideals or by the cult of personality, AKA Donald Trump.
And the other nut jobs that, yeah. Okay, well, any other joys or concerns? Okay, Fred, turn it over to you for opening words.
All right. You may have to hold the mic depending on it syncs. It looks like we are on the precipice of Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization abortion decision. And we have a theme of justice for today's talk. And with that in mind, I have a quote from Law and Literature, an essay by soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo, written for the Yale Law Review in 1925. The essay includes meditation on dissenting opinions. So I quote, "We need not be surprised, therefore, to find in dissent a certain looseness of texture and depth of color rarely found in the per curiam. Sometimes, as I have said, there is just a suspicion of acerbity, but this, after all, is rare. More truly characteristic of dissent is a dignity, an elevation of mood and thought and phrase, deep conviction and warm feeling, pardon me, deep conviction and warm feeling are saying their last say with knowledge that the cause is lost. The voice of the majority may be that of force triumphant, content with the plaudits of the hour, and reckoning little of the morrow. The dissenter speaks of the future, and his voice is pitched to a key that will carry through the years. Read some of the great dissents, the opinion, for example, of Justice Curtis in the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision, and feel, after the cooling of time, the better part of a century, the glow and fire of a faith that was content to bide its hour. The prophet and the martyr do not see the hooting throng. Their eyes are fixed on the eternities." So a take home from this quote that Justice Curtis has made in 1957 dissenting opinion squarely laid the intellectual foundation for the 14th Amendment granting equal protection that effectively overturned Dred Scott only a decade later. And so that's something to consider if things don't go our way. So thank you. And Dorothy, are you going to introduce our speaker?
So we're fortunate today to have Rick Glazier, the Executive Director of the North Carolina Justice Center, here with us. Quick brief bio. Rick joined the Justice Center in the summer of 2015 following his resignation from the North Carolina General Assembly after 13 years representing Cumberland County in the North Carolina House of Representatives. As a representative, he served on the House Judiciary, Education, Ethics, and Appropriation Committees, among others. He was a visiting professor in criminal justice at Fayetteville State University and has been teaching at Campbell University School of Law for 30 years, in addition to past teaching roles at other institutions. He's a former chair of the Cumberland County School Board. He also serves on the North Carolina Innocence Inquiry Commission. Please join me in giving Rick a warm welcome.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to do this. May make it easier. I really appreciate the invitation to speak today. And as the speakers before me have indicated, we are at a really exceptional tipping point in a lot of arenas: judicial, legislative, economic, foreign policy. I want to talk about a couple of things. And what I'd like to gear my talk around is the Justice Center, which is what I was asked to come to speak, what we do, what our mission is, and how we work to achieve change. But in talking about that, I'm going to try to highlight what I think are at least 5 key issues pending in the North Carolina legislature and before us over the next 30 to 45 days. And then I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about why your organizations like mine are so desperately needed now, and why the work we do is so critical in leading our communities, leading our state, and leading our country, and hopefully worldwide. So let me start with the Justice Center mission. The Justice Center was formed 26 years ago, although we're celebrating our 25th anniversary because of COVID. So new math, but we were formed 26 years ago. And the Justice Center spurred or was formed when the Republican Congress in the 1990s put limitations on legal aid organizations throughout the country. They were unable to engage in immigration litigation. They were unable to engage in class actions. They were unable to lobby legislative changes. And when those limitations were put in place, organizations like the Justice Center sprang out of legal aid and legal service organizations in the country. Our mission has not changed. It is to alleviate poverty and the effects and collateral consequences of poverty in the state of North Carolina. And it is a holistic mission if there ever was one. Clients do not come to us or to any legal aid organization with one problem. If they have an eviction issue, they probably also have a healthcare access issue. They also have issues with their children in public education capacities. And so we try to look at families, we look at issues for communities and for the state in a holistic manner. And we go about our mission. We are one of the larger nonprofits in the state. We have 53 full-time staff. And we go about our mission utilizing 5 theories of change: litigation, and particularly impact litigation, class action litigation. We do take some individual cases, but we don't take a lot of them unless they are ones that have an impact beyond that case. Secondly, lobbying. We have a number of on-staff lobbyists plus contract lobbyists, including, Madam President, including Republican contract lobbyists, given the political environment in which we operate. And so lobbying both at the state level, sometimes at the community level with county commissioners or city councils, but increasingly as well at Congress is part of our theory. We engage in deep policy research. We have a number of masters and PhDs on staff who deal with economic analysis, substantive policy analysis, and we produce a number of policy research and reports. Fourth theory of change is community engagement. And that takes lots of shapes and forms, not just because of COVID, but because of our role in the ecospace. Sometimes we're there to provide technical assistance or policy assistance to the on-the-ground organization. Sometimes we're part of coalitions, as we are with the Medicaid Expansion Healthcare Access Coalition. Sometimes we do direct community engagement in town hall meetings, in webinars and virtual kinds of settings and in direct settings. And sometimes we engage in a lot of storytelling work and archival work of people's anecdotal information. And finally, very unusual for an organization like ours, we have investigative journalism as our fifth line of work. Policy Watch is a part of the Justice Center for now, and we have 5 full-time investigative journalists plus a full-time person on commentary, and act as the ability to set out more voices in the progressive space in North Carolina across the state. Having 5 theories of change, we also focus on 7 sort of primary subject matter areas of work in this holistic way. And as I go through these, I'm going to try to highlight a couple of the issues that you know about, but that I think are really at the forefront right now of social justice and potential change, good and bad, in North Carolina. The first is of deep support for public education. And that is not only K-12, but early childhood education and the university system. For example, I have been deeply involved personally since my political career began in Cumberland County in the Leandro case. We are deeply involved in the Leandro case, which is the school financing case, probably going to be one of the most important constitutional decisions by our North Carolina Supreme Court in many decades. And the real issue here is that this state operates and has been operating for 25 plus years an unconstitutional system of funding public education. We know that by the court decision, and we now know that because the governor, the executive branch, has consented to a judgment that says we've been operating unconstitutionally for 25 years, and that at a minimum, $5.9 billion is needed over the next 6 years to get us to a constitutional minimum standard. That case is at its posture now where it is finally where we've been trying to get it for many years at the North Carolina Supreme Court. And we will be part of the briefing team in that case. And the issue is the simple one. The trial court has issued a judgment that says the North Carolina legislature must pay $1.7 billion into the public school system of the state, above and beyond what they're paying, for this year and next year, the first 2 years of the 8-year Leandro plan, and ordered the legislature to pay. The legislature majority has refused. They have increased the amount of money in the budget, but it's nowhere close to what it is. It's about $800 million short of the $1.7 billion. The simple question before the Supreme Court to be argued now, it looks like in August, in fact, I think the argument date has been set at August 29th, is can the judicial system of the state order the state through the legislature to pay an appropriation to meet a constitutional requirement that the state consented to pay? And it's not one that's ever been answered in this state. It's only one that's been answered in a few states. But it will decide the issue of whether we will ever see a sound basic education, as our Constitution requires, for the children of this state. It is a moral, it is an ethical, it is a constitutional mandate. If there is no other legacy we leave, at least we ought to leave this place a better place for us having been here in the education of a child. And that is the fundamental issue subsumed within the legal issue before the court to be decided this summer. We are deeply involved in that. At the university level, there is equally a critical case that will decide the future of admissions policies in the universities and public universities of this state. The UNC system has been involved in litigation for a number of years, coextensive with the same issue occurring at Harvard. And both cases are now up to the US Supreme Court, and that is a question of whether the university's affirmative admissions policy is constitutional or not. The trial court has found that it is. We represent interveners supporting the university's policy, but it is now before the Supreme Court to be argued this fall. And while we can hope that there will be a positive decision for that, the tea leaves are not good as to whether, when the court accepted this case, as to whether they will strike down affirmative admissions policies in this country that have been with us ever since the Bakke decision back in the 70s and 80s. That's the first area of work that we're deeply involved in. The second area of work is healthcare access. We have been on the front lines of moving back in the early part of this decade for Obamacare, for the Affordable Care Act, and then becoming navigators for the Affordable Care Act system. We have been big supporters individually and in our lobbying effort and as part of coalitions for Medicaid expansion. And all of us know great progress last week for the first time in a decade in this state. The Republican Senate voted for Medicaid expansion 44-2, if I remember, to move for Medicaid expansion, not full expansion, but a substantial expansion, which would effectively provide for healthcare access for 600,000 vulnerable North Carolinians who have been without healthcare for years. We are one of only 10 states left that have not in one way, shape, or form expanded Medicaid and taken advantage of the federal program. We are now one vote away in the House, but a big vote, from making that a reality after really 11 years of fighting for this. We are also deeply involved in healthcare disparity work in our state. As you know, we have deep disparities. One statistic that that came out a number of years ago, but holds true still. If you divided this state into two states and made the 51st state all of the counties east of I-95, it would rank dead last, 51st in healthcare criteria. And so we have deep healthcare disparities in this state, and we work on finding those and trying to find solutions and policy solutions for them. We have been deeply involved in trying to strengthen the public health infrastructure of this state long before COVID, really starting way back with the SARS epidemic and working on issues in that regard. And we are also deeply involved in trying to find solutions to the reduction of medical debt for so many. Those are some of the big policy areas. But the one that's moving, the one that we could have a vote on next week, although I think it's going to be at the end of session, is Medicaid expansion. And the House right now leadership, unlike the Senate leadership, has indicated they do not support Medicaid expansion. The question becomes whether that's a real opposition or it is being used as a bargaining chip for something the House wants with the Senate. No one is quite certain. The third area we work on is workers' rights. And here we work on expanding paid family leave policies, particularly in cities and counties, because that's the place where we're able to get movement. We work on overtime and minimum wage compliance issues. We also work on unemployment benefits. I was in the House when, unfortunately, after 8 years in the majority, we were in the minority. And one of the first things the Republicans did in 2011 was slash unemployment benefits in this state. We used to be a state where we should have been in the middle of the nation in terms of our duration of benefits and the amount we give our unemployed citizens. We now rank dead last in the country. There is no state, I used to say, thank God for Mississippi, but I can't say it anymore. No state gives less benefits in maximum duration or amount to their unemployed citizens at the most vulnerable time our citizens need their government's help. The government in this state has for a decade now turned its back, despite having, I might add, almost $3.5 billion in surplus in the unemployment fund. So we fight to try to change that. Obviously, the federal benefits made a big impact during COVID, and there was some expanded state capacity as a result of that. But those expansions are gone. And so we are back to the bad unemployment benefits, which for right now, given our unemployment rate, is a little less of a problem. But if we move into recession, and that is a possibility, I don't personally believe that will happen. But if we did, we will be left with the worst unemployment benefits in the country. The fourth area that we deal with is housing and consumer, and it has been a huge part of our work in the last 2 years. We were deeply involved with the governor and the administrative staff on the eviction moratoriums, on the foreclosure moratoriums, and on the utility arrearage moratoriums. We are deeply involved in working with the Utilities Commission on those as they've been extended over the COVID period, and quite frankly, in a good way, with Duke Energy, who has been more compliant in working voluntarily in that arena than you might think. And being involved with them has been a good partnership to encourage those kinds of behavior. Because if anything saved hundreds of thousands of children and families in this state from eviction and from having their utilities cut off, it was those moratorium, which in essence also limited the COVID damage in our state and the deaths in our state in that regard. We've also involved deeply on low income energy efficiency assistance. It is great when we see a rebate that the federal government puts out for certain types of appliances that have energy efficiency parts to them. And those of us, many of us in this room who can go buy a new refrigerator, we don't think about that and we get the rebate. But if you don't have enough money to buy a new refrigerator, you barely have enough to pay your energy bill to keep the one you're going, you don't benefit from that kind of credit. So the question becomes, how do you assist low income people to get energy efficient homes? And we work on that. We also are deeply involved in working on climate change and have been involved since the Obama administration in partnership with a number of the federal initiatives in that regard. Our fifth area of work is on immigration and refugee rights. And while from 2017 to 2020, it was on the defense in almost every way, protecting people from deportation, helping people with asylum claims, working with people to get power of attorney and documents together for families who would be left here when parents were being deported. We continue to work on asylum cases. We continue to work on DACA support for a number of DACA people in North Carolina. We work on public benefit access for those who are immigrants who fear even seeking access because they think that will somehow be utilized against them, but are entitled to public access to certain benefits. And we continue to work slowly and quietly behind the scenes for in-state tuition action eventually. We're not at a point with this legislature where that's likely, but eventually we are hopeful that that tune will change. The sixth area that we work in is fair chance criminal justice reform. And here I want to take a minute because it's an area where there's been amazing bipartisan success. North Carolina, a few years ago, had two laws on the books that you should know. Three laws that you should know. One, we were the last state in the union that kept 16 and 17-year-olds in adult court and didn't have them in juvenile court. So you could have a misdemeanor larceny, you could have a larceny charge when you were 16 and come to North Carolina from any other state in the union, and it would be sealed and no one would know about it, and you'd never have to tell anyone about it, whether that was in a college application or a military application or a job application. But you would if you were a North Carolina kid, because they were the only ones we were harming by not having our 16 and 17-year-old offenses under juvenile seal. That changed 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, under a lot of lobbying work that was done by a coalition, and we were a part of that coalition. First good change in North Carolina. We may have been last, but we got it done. Second good change. We had the worst expunction laws in the country. And that is when people commit crimes when they're younger, there ought to be a mechanism, absent it being a violent crime, for eventually having that criminal conviction cleared so that it isn't a bar for the rest of their life to military, to jobs, and to school. Provided, again, they have met all the obligations of their probation, parole, or finished any jail term, and they haven't generally reoffended. We had the worst set of laws. We now have some of the best. We have changed our expunction laws so that, again, absent it being a violent crime or a significant repeat offender, There is a process in place for most crimes over a period of time to get expunged, and different laws. We can talk about that in a Q&A or at another time because it's pretty in-depth, but it's important to know we are on the right path. Third, and by the way, 1.5 million North Carolinians have a criminal record. 1.5 million. This doesn't just affect, 200,000 that we don't know about. It affects people on almost every street and every block in every town. This third real important area is driver's license restoration. If you don't have a driver's license, number one, hard to get a job that requires transportation. Number two, it's unsafe for all the rest of us if you get in an accident because you don't have insurance. There are 1.6 million North Carolinians, adults, who do not have a driver's license, not because they committed a DUI, but because they have an unpaid parking fee or an unpaid traffic ticket going through a stop sign or not failing to yield. We have a law that remains on the books that if you don't pay your parking fine or your driver's license fine within 30 days of the date it was due in court, you permanently lose your license and must go to court to pay off the ticket and ask for the license to be coming back, for which you have to pay a couple $100 fee. Well, if you didn't have the money to pay your ticket, you hardly have the money to do that. And so we have people, for example, in Robeson County, one of the poorest counties in North Carolina, 52% of the adults in that county don't have a driver's license because of this law. So we have been actively engaged with the Chief Justice's Equal Access to Justice Commission, with the ACLU, and with legal aid organizations to hold driver's license restoration clinics with particularly good DAs. Durham is an example, who have gone about finding ways to get thousands of people over the last couple of years, really tens of thousands of people, their driver's license back. But we still got about a 1.45 million left of that 1.6 million who don't have a driver's license because they didn't pay a parking ticket or a failure to stop ticket 25 years ago. We are the only state that I know of in the union that has the permanent bar. That's about to get changed as well. So progress being made on really important fronts. And here I must say, with the help of a couple Republican leaders who really understand the issue, that this is not only a moral, but it's an economic issue. You may not love the fact that someone didn't pay their ticket, but are you really going to hold it against them and hold it against all the rest of us economically, keep them from getting insurance, keep them from getting a job? That argument has held sway and has won. The last two projects that we are involved in is Policy Watch, our journalistic entity. We have an environmental justice reporter full-time, an education reporter full-time, 2 legislative reporters full-time, and a courts and democracy reporter full-time. I have to brag, but our environmental justice reporter, Lisa Sorg, 2 years ago won the National Sierra Club Award for the best environmental journalist in the country. So we're very lucky in that regard. And we're able to do in-depth journalism in a way that adds to the ability for change. And the last project that we have is a communications project, which is both internal and external. And here reside our ability, when we're dealing with just a lobbying support of other organizations, a couple of issues in the last week come to mind. We issued press releases and documentary information with supporting safety issues and safety measures that should be taken by the state as well as the federal government as a result of the number of school shootings, including support for red flag law, extended background checks, ban of assault weapons, or at least a change in the age of buying of assault weapons. Seemingly minimal changes given overwhelming public support of all of them. We don't have a particular project that works on that, and so we assign it to our comms team to at least engage in that opportunity. In addition, we have geared them up for whatever is going to happen from the court in Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs case. I still hold out some hope that Chief Justice Roberts will prevail on at least one colleague to find middle ground and not to uproot civil society with the change after 50 years in what is a fundamental protection for women of this country, but remains to be seen. We know that that decision will issue within the next 3.5 weeks and probably the last day of the session. By the way, just to note, it's always a question telepathically when the legislature is going to get out of session. They're in their short session. They've made it clear, the Republican leadership, that they want out by June 27th this year, and they want it out because they don't want to be in session when the Roe versus Wade opinion issues, which is, interesting, but that just to note. And so we're also very involved in voting rights protection and voter suppression, opposition to the voter suppression bills. And I highlight all of those issues because they're all here right now. They're all ones that can fundamentally change our state and our democracy. I'm glad to engage with you after I finish my comments in a discussion of any of them and any questions you have or things you think we should do or could be doing better, or things that we can do to assist the people in this room in your advocacy efforts as a group or as individuals in your work. I want to turn my final 10 minutes or 8 minutes to comments that I feel very strongly about in my public life and have guided my public life, but have guided, I hope, the organization I now direct. But I also hope they guide all of us as people who care deeply about our society. And so the question for me, and I think I can relate to this organization in many ways, is one of stewardship. And it is critical in how we answer that question to the development of us as a people, progress as a state, and in many ways, our continued existence of humanity as we know it. Leadership or stewardship is a way of thinking to me. It is an attitude that involves more than just responding to a verbalized need. It often involves perceiving unvoiced requests and capitalizing on our individual or organizational capacities of individual talent, skill, and resources to help. It is an affirmative, assertive commandment and not a voluntary, fortuitous opportunity of response. Leadership, serving, giving, whether we're talking time or we're talking philanthropy, is an obligation and a standard of excellence of any community. It is for all in this room, I am sure, a central part of the fabric of your lives. It is an idea that transcends religious barriers and political ideologies. It is an obligation to help those in need by giving them the money, material goods, time, talent, and assistance to improve their lives. In every respect, it is an ethical and moral commitment that each of us has an obligation to fulfill. The giving of ourselves, whether it is through our time or our assistance or money, lets that giving become a means of creating holiness in many ways. To me, in my religion, God is the creator of both rich and poor, to many of the latter in so many parts of this state. And I believe that God wants all of his children to help each other, and the act of giving back in our communities and our state and our nation makes us and makes North Carolina a more loving and compassionate place to live. In my religion, there's a story of a very learned clergyman many centuries ago who would give a coin to a beggar and then begin to pray. And he would explain his actions by quoting from Psalms, "Through giving shall I see God's face." The act of giving, in many respects, in how we go about that in our lives, involves technique. There are quality as well as quantity issues. The effect of good giving relates both to the lasting effect of our service and the sensitivity about the manner in which we give it to the recipient. Maimonides, a 12th century scholar, talked about the 8 steps on the ladder of giving. The top of the ladder is helping someone to help themselves, often by teaching them a skill or providing them an education or creating the conditions in which those things can happen. Most people, in my experience, want to climb the ladder of success, but almost every one of us needs a hand up at a different time, some oftentimes. And how we give of our time and effort focuses and needs to focus as much on the psychological and emotional needs of the recipient as on the physical act of what we're doing. I suppose the first real question that really should get asked is why give of our time at all? Everyone in this room is, I imagine, very successful and extraordinarily gifted. So I answer this question with any audience I talk to with three different answers. First, there's a moral commitment to do so. Second, it's a responsibility we can never abdicate in the communities in which we live. And third, it just helps us be a better person. And so I want to take each of those in turn. First, the idea that there's a commandment, a moral obligation to do so. It seems to me our most enduring job in this world is to take great care of what has been created for us. We can use the raw materials in the world to support ourselves, but everything we have, in its really most basic sense, is really loaned to us. We have been provided the eyes and the ears and the brains and the hands to grow and progress as a society, but whether we do so is the ultimate human decision we affect every day. Every religion teaches its people that they were created to work and keep the world a good place. And in that sense, for me, God lets us use our land to meet our responsibilities and share in the world's bounty. And I suppose the law of tithing in every religion known to mankind is, if you will, simply the landlord's conditions. We are allowed to work and reap profit and lead good lives, but only if we help all of the other people in the world to do the same. The second reason for me, I learned about community in my religion from a scholar named Hillel. And he said this: if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? Everyone in this room belongs to family, some big and some small. Some live in one place, some in multiple locations around the globe. But all families provide for themselves certain basic things: clothing, food, shelter, love, companionship. And for a family to fulfill its commitment to every member, each person has responsibilities. Well, in this room, we know we all belong to a bigger family, whether it is Chapel Hill, whether it is Wake County, whether it is the state of North Carolina, whether it is the United States, whether it is the world. In this state, for example, we provide many services to our members: protection, recreation, transportation, jobs, and just as with our family, if we enjoy the benefits of our state, we have to equally contribute to its maintenance, paying taxes, abiding by its laws, but most importantly, contributing and leading the community in service, in governing, in religious, in social organizations that help those in need in every community in which we live. And I think about what would happen if none of us did that. Hunger, homelessness, disease, indifference, poverty. We are in the end talking about real people who are dramatically affected by our decisions to help and give, or our decisions not to do that. At its core, the goal of every member in a community is to help alleviate human suffering wherever possible. We all have to be good parents and good spouses, but we must also be good stewards of where we live. There is a solemn obligation passed to us by previous generations, and by living here, we agree to accept it, and that is to leave our community a better place because we were here. And there is a trust placed in us by future generations not yet born to fulfill our maintenance obligations to fight poverty and disease, ignorance and bigotry, and apathy and distrust. There is demanded no abdication of mind and spirit and every possible sacrifice of the soul. When there are tears or suffering in our community, we weep. When a cry of despair is heard, we ought to answer with hope. And when we see a project unfinished, we should help complete it. Our collective experiences make clear there is no escape for this duty, and word is no substitute for deed. The fundamental lesson is we cannot ever separate ourselves from the larger community in which we live. And a great story. There was once a clergyman who was famous for collecting charity. And one day he went to the house of an equally famous miser. And the man was very rich and very lonely. And in spite of that, the clergyman asked for a donation and the miser began to scream at him. The only time anyone comes to my house is to take my money. I have worked all my life for that money, and I am not going to give it to you. No one cares about me. I work for this. Go get your own. The clergyman thought for a minute and then said, would you answer 2 questions for me? And the miser said, sure. He said, please go to the window and tell me what you see. And the man went to the window and began describing the people in the street. And then the clergyman picked up a mirror and said, please tell me what you see now. And he said, well, I see only myself. And the clergyman said, well, then the lesson is very simple, isn't it? Look into the silver and you see only yourself. Take the silver away from the glass and you see the rest of your community. And the opportunity for all of us is to help our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, to take the silver away from the glass so that we can all see everyone else. And finally, I think the third reason I said is I think giving and serving of time and resources and philanthropy, we do it because it makes us feel good. It helps us to be sensitive to everyone else's needs, which makes us a better person. It also helps us to be the person we want to be, that sometimes we put artificial restrictions in front of that keep us from getting there. It is critical, even in the face of massive new technology in our society, that the human dimension in our lives remains paramount and constant. The body of the world's knowledge doubles every several years these days, but nothing, no machine, no technology, no computer will ever replace human contact and kindness and love. And far too often, all of us get caught up in the material possessions of life. How much money we make, how much cyberspace we explore. In my teenage years, the designer clothes I wore or didn't wear. And what we forget is what counts as none of that. Instead, it is the people we touch and the good we do with our family and the love we show and the sacrifice we show to better the society to which we live. It is important to remember that there is always got to be time in our daily life to exhibit random acts of kindness, to care deeply for people besides ourselves, and to love and be loved. And although sometimes it seems in the tangled World Wide Web we are all sitting ducks quacking digital code, that is sound does not reflect the true sound of human existence. Paraphrasing Tom Brokaw, no piece of software, no server, no network will ever replace commitments and dreams and love, and no computer can replace the moral underpinning of a life lived well. It would be a shame, he wrote, if one day we all woke up to find that although we have wired the world, we have short-circuited our souls. And so in the quiet times of reflection, I try to remind my staff, my family, my friends, that if we only had but 1 hour to live, we wouldn't wish for a bigger home or more product to sell or more cyberspace to explore, but instead we would wish to have that hour with our family that we love, to care for each other, and to do whatever we could in that hour to leave this place better for the next generation. Anna Quinlan has written, and one of my favorite authors, we all want to do well in life, but if we also don't do good with our life, doing well will never be enough. I close my comments with one last story, a true story about a man named Alfred Nobel, and it's called the Alfred Nobel paradigm. Some of you are nodding, so you may have heard this. Alfred Nobel won his fortune as the inventor of dynamite. He had a twin brother, and one day his twin brother died. And the Swiss newspaper that heard about the death got it wrong and printed instead Alfred Nobel's obituary instead of that of his brother. And it started out, quote, Alfred Nobel, who invented a way to kill more people faster than anyone in history, died yesterday, a wealthy man, end quote. And unlike the rest of us, Nobel had the opportunity to read his own obituary and to say, that is not how I want to be remembered. And so he took his entire fortune and from that day forward devoted it to the Nobel Prizes. And so today everybody associates him with peace and humanity and social justice, and hardly anybody remembers he was the inventor of dynamite. And so I close with that story because I think it highlights the point None of us will be rich in a wealthy sense from the community work that we do, but we will be rich in every way. We will be remembered for every child we touch, every family we save, and as keepers of this state's soul. Thank you. Now, I'm glad to do Q&A.
Yeah, we take a pause to do a collection. And I need to find my words here. Thank you very much, by the way. No, you can stay up here. And thank you very much. That was a very inspiring talk. So we passed the baskets before starting our Q&A. Our society is an all-volunteer organization. We receive no money from any other organization. We survive due to your commitment to our common goals, that together we can continue to provide a place where ethics and shaping a more caring and thoughtful world is our ultimate concern. So we pass the basket and thank you for your generous donations. And we will start Q&A. And so as a reminder of how we're going to do this, Fred, are you going to pass the,
Yeah.
Remember, we're in a hybrid meeting, so we need to wait for mics so that people on Zoom can hear. We ask that we do one question at a time and give everybody else a chance before we go back to a questioner. So thank you, Rick, for being willing to do this. And Chris.
I actually have two questions from the Zoom audience from two different people, so I'll count that as abiding by your request for. First question is, how is the NC Justice Center funded?
The NC Justice Center is funded dominantly by foundations, grants. About 87% of our $6.5 million, almost $7 million budget is, we have circulating in our office 72 grants at any one time.
Wow.
And that's part of it. And then the other 13% is from donations, which we raise as normal fundraising events. So we essentially get about 600,000 plus to 700,000 from individual donors. And we don't accept government money.
Okay. Second question from someone else, from Ann Husner. First question was from Todd. So this question is, most people probably know this, but can you spell out what are the arguments not to expand Medicare in North Carolina?
Medicaid?
I'm sorry, Medicaid.
Okay. The arguments not to expand Medicaid have focused on a couple things. One, it was originally focused on, well, the federal commitment is time limited. And so when it ends, the state will be responsible for billions of dollars that, and on the theory that once a program's created, it's very hard to undo it. That's not turned out to be true. The feds have continued their commitment. And I think now we're a decade plus in, that argument has sort of fallen by the wayside. The second argument at the time was a view that there was a lot of fraud in the program. That's been shown not to be particularly true. And so that argument has fallen. I think subtly there was a third argument, which was for a number of years through the Trump administration, the belief that the Republicans would repeal the program. That hadn't happened. And when they had the opportunity, they didn't, thanks to John McCain. And so I think that's what led us to where we are, in combination with the opportunity that exists that the Republicans feared that Build Back Better would be passed in Washington, which would then create a forced program on North Carolina. And we'd rather create our own program than have the feds dictate to us. So I think all of that, the main arguments falling by the wayside, the threat of Build Back Better and of a Biden administration forced program, kind of all are pushing it. Plus a belief now that feds actually have all this money and we've lost billions and billions of dollars over time.
All right, I'm going to take executive privilege and ask a question myself as well. With the number of the impressive number of priorities that you mentioned, all outstanding and I think certainly deserving, do you have sufficient staff to divide among all those priorities? Do you have to make tough decisions about which ones to prioritize?
Well, all the ones that we talked about were engaged in, but we obviously don't have as much staff as we would like. I don't think anybody ever has as many staff as they would like to engage on the advocacy side. So we make decisions about where resources go, whether we add a particular staff to a project, but we are at least able to staff at some level the projects that I talked about. There are, of course, 100 other social justice issues that we don't get to. And hopefully all of the organization and the ecospace of all of us does get to it. As an example, the issue on guns. I have a deep, strong personal belief about that. And so do a lot of our people, but we can't, I don't have a grant that allows me to staff up. And so I have to use general operating funds to do the best we can there.
Okay, when you ask a question, please hold the mic at kind of an angle like this so we can hear you. And I'm going to start with the closest and work my way around.
Sorry. I was just in a talk by one of the North Carolina justices who said that his reading of what had leaked on Roe versus Wade, at least, was that the federal judiciary was looking to press things down to state level, states' rights kinds of things, and that he didn't want those things to be states' rights, number one. But number two, given your talk that we're going dead last, there was the time when that would have been comforting because I think we would have been more progressive than many. It scares me in a time when we're vying to be dead last. So could you speak to that issue?
Yeah, I'll try to, because it encompassed a couple points that I think are really good ones. You know, we have a lot of races for election cycle this fall. And we can all talk about the importance of the US Senate seat, about holding, I don't think anyone believes the Democrats will regain control of the House and Senate in North Carolina, but there is a thought that it's helpful to the state that there not be ultra majorities that can override governor vetoes. So the hope is to do that. But the two biggest races really are the two Supreme Court seats, because it is the big check and balance. And there's a 4-3 Democratic majority on the Supreme Court if those two seats go, or if any one of those seats goes, and it flips to a Republican majority, as well as the Republican supermajority that may happen in the legislature, there will legitimately be no check and balance. The governor will be irrelevant because he'll not be able to have vetoes sustained. The court won't act as the check. I highlight this because in the period 2011 to 2021, there have been, I think I'm correct, 52 pieces of legislation for which there have been legal action to seek it being declared in federal or state court as unconstitutional. In about 90% of those cases, we have won those legal battles on declaring a lot of bad laws unconstitutional at state court and in federal court. Those rights hang by a thread. And so those two justices' positions are just critical to maintaining some check and balance in the system. And I don't know if that's what you want to, and I do think that the judge or justice that you heard is right. That draft seeks to end any federal protection for reproductive rights found in the Constitution, which shifted to the state constitutions to find those rights and state legislatures, which is just Jim Dandy in blue states, but there'll be no backup, no fundamental right of reproductive freedom or liberty or thought in red states and purple states, likely. So it is an odd time. I mean, back in the 60s, right, we wanted everything. We wanted the federal courts were the protector of individual liberties. And now we're looking to state courts to be the protector of individual liberties. So times have definitely changed.
Thank you for coming. Got more of a statement than a question. This past week, there was a huge news story about LeBron James becoming the first billionaire athlete. So this kind of goes towards the latter part of your talk. Decades ago, I came across an article that said when one person becomes a millionaire, he sends 100 people into poverty. He sends 100 people into poverty. So my thought all this week was, how many people did LeBron James send into poverty to become a billionaire? Because there's limited resources. So if he's got the money, that means somebody else doesn't. So that goes to your second part.
I do think it's helpful to be encouraging, and James is one that fits the category where there is there's an increasing productivity from athletes, particularly actors as actresses as well, to utilize some of their extraordinary profit for social good organizational capacity. And I think that needs to be encouraged at much deeper levels. And that's the only good side of that discussion, I think.
A couple of quick comments directly triggered by your speech that don't require an answer. First of all, you can thank God for Puerto Rico because it has the lowest unemployment compensation rate in the US. And DC, in my experience, has the highest because I had a combined wage claim one time. And just luckily I filed in DC. If I filed in Puerto Rico, I got no rate. And it's not trivial because there are more people in that territory
than a little bit closer.
More people in that territory than about 13 of the states. As the territory, they don't get to vote except Congress passed a special legislation so DC can vote in the popular election. The other territories cannot, although they're citizens. So thank God for Puerto Rico in a sense. You're not last. The other thing is I saw a presentation by a graduate of Spelman College who said that until she had managed to pay her student loan, she could not get a transcript or any acknowledgement of graduation. If that's a systemic problem, you might want to look into that.
We are looking at that, and that is an issue.
And yes, I started out working in an anti-poverty program under Lyndon Johnson, and in a think tank. And it seems to me poverty is systemic, but why don't we talk about it as a systemic problem? We label other things as systemic, but it's a systemic problem, and you can focus better on the components, I think, if you think of it in that way.
I want to go back to the very beginning of your talk. And you mentioned that the legal aid societies were restricted.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could just list those again and tell us why they were restricted and who restricted them.
Newt Gingrich and the Republican Congress in the contract that they had in 1995, 96, if I remember, 94, 93, 94, no, it's 94, 95, 96. They passed and was signed into law a restriction on the kinds of subject matter that legal services organizations funded through federal money could engage in. And the restrictions they put in place, the major ones, were they were no longer allowed to lobby for changes with legislatures or Congress. Number two, they were not allowed to do immigration cases. And number three, they were not allowed to do class actions, impact litigation. They could do individual cases, but not class actions. And those were three primary ways to achieve pretty significant social change and have political currency that were taken away in the mid-90s and have never been restored by Congress. And so that's led to organizations like mine with staffed by several legal services people shifting gears to an organization that didn't get federal money and could do those things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Just one last answer to you, by the way, which I think is important to know. The three biggest legal services organizations, I'll say the four biggest ones in the state, are Legal Aid of North Carolina, which is based in Raleigh, but has really operates throughout the state, has a number of offices. Pisgah Legal Services, which operates in the 17 or so western counties out of Asheville, and Charlotte Legal Advocacy Center, which operates out of Charlotte and 7 counties surrounding Charlotte. And then Disability Rights North Carolina, which operates throughout North Carolina, but is housed in Raleigh. And those are the four biggest legal services organizations in the state. And I might add one thing to note, and people don't recognize this. From a resource point of view, the state used to fund about $6 million a year in legal services money. And about 4 years ago, the Republicans eliminated all legal service money for the state of North Carolina. That was another one of the budget cuts, which we're seeking in this session to get restoration of some of it. And so legal services in our state is only able to serve well less than half of the people that are eligible that come to them. And 35% of all legal services cases are domestic violence cases. And I don't think people understand that. 35% of all the legal services cases in the state are domestic violence cases.
I'd like to ask, do we have another question?
Yes. I have a good friend.
When you say legal services, are you talking about legal aid societies?
Yes,
Okay.
we call them legal services or legal aids. You can
So
match them.
how are they surviving if,
Federal money, grants, operational grants, federal money, and contributions through their fundraising as well. They still get substantial federal. They're getting, depending on the organization, some get more than others. Yes. Yep.
I think I heard somewhere in your talk something about voting rights, and I'm wondering something more specific about what your agency is doing for voting rights. And then also in response to the legal services in the 70s and 80s, my husband was executive director of the National Juvenile Law Center, and Nixon tried to defund all of the legal services agencies. He was not successful because of the great service that they were doing at the time.
Yeah, and so far those attempts to, other than marginally cut, have been beat back by a bipartisan Republican and Democratic people in Congress. Obviously, I worry that if there's a Republican president in combination with a Republican control of the Senate and House with significant majorities, we may yet have to fight that battle again. Your first question was on voting rights. And so two things. One, this is one of those that we actually stay pretty quiet about this session because there's no bad bills pending. They don't, because of the Cooper veto possibility, they're not moving like in other states for bad stuff. And so it's like, get out of town, go home. Don't, the quicker you go, the better, because we have had to face that. As you know, we had to face the monster voter suppression bills in the last decade that we were part of fighting in court. In fact, I was a witness in 5 different hearings and did win including at the United States Supreme Court, striking down our voter suppression laws, a number of them. And so the Republicans now are reticent to fight that battle again, and know until they get a supermajority, we will see those bills if the supermajority reemerges after the November election. But they know they'd be vetoed now, so we're not seeing anything in North Carolina. Thank goodness.
Hello.
So we're going to have to, we have a couple more, and then I think we're going to, did you have a question?
Yes.
I know that's so true. I'm gonna try to narrow it to one question. In regards to the work that you all are doing with healthcare access, my question is more about how deep does that go? I know with the expansion of Medicaid, that's been a huge thing. I used to work as a Medicaid case manager. So my question is really about, do you expand into people who are discriminated against because they have Medicaid? Folks have access issues sometimes because of the limits that are put on them because of their type of insurance. Even though we expand Medicaid, it doesn't make Medicaid pay more necessarily for the services. So just any feedback.
The work that's been done sort of in segments. In the beginning part of last decade, we did a ton of work, given our healthcare team was 4 people, back then 3 people, now it's 5 people, was on navigating and getting people signed up under the Affordable Care Act, and then fighting the lobbying battles within our delegation to keep them from repealing it. And then the second big body of work, which has continued all the way through, which has occupied a predominant portion of time is fighting for the Medicaid expansion bill. And that has included storytelling and getting videos and creating anecdotal evidence, testifying at hearings, town hall meetings, getting unlikely messengers and partners, working with the military, for example, about how they could benefit from Medicaid expansion, working with the police and sheriff's associations to get them to support Medicaid expansion. So it's been a huge body of work, which will come to, I hope, fruition this year. And then it'll switch to Medicaid expansion implementation issues, of which there will be 1,000. And so we'll start to work on that when that happens. The side work that we do is a lot of work on healthcare disparities and looking for trying to get resources in, particularly into Eastern North Carolina, for getting to those disparities. And as I suggested, trying to work with the legislature on lobbying for local public health infrastructure. We were pretty successful in the first part of the century, the first decade, in being a part of lobbying. And I was in the legislature then, so I was the subject of their lobbying to get a new public health lab, to put 15 million stockpiled in of SARS-related antivirals into our registry and hold, getting additional money to all local public health centers for additional infrastructure capacity, which has since been repealed by the current majority. And so I think now is the time, and I've told my staff, what are the lessons learned out of this pandemic? How do we create policy initiatives and funding opportunities to think about getting us much better prepared for the next one, which is inevitable, right? So those are sort of the priorities. Mental health issues are also big, and particularly as it ties in with school. And also the other thing we've done joint work with our education team on is trying desperately to get additional school nurses, school social workers, and school psychologists hired and into the budget funding.
I will have two more, Judith and then Kent.
Sorry. This is my 401st question. I'll send you the other ones. With regard to Medicare or Medicaid, actually Medicare, but especially Medicaid, I'm from a family of doctors. I live with my daughter and son-in-law who are doctors. It isn't the doctors who do not want to take Medicaid patients. It's the administration that needs to have more and more money. And are you working? I mean, this is not just here. Is that one of the things you're working on, the disparity in profits relative to patient care?
I would love to say that we have the opportunity. We don't have the staff to have done that. We understand and agree with you on your analysis of the problem and where it is up the chain. And I think that there will be, as we said, when Medicaid is expanded, we can switch some staffing and policy expertise into not only the implementation, but also into things like drug pricing issues and things like Medicaid acceptance. I think all those are big issues, but in candor, we have focused deeply because we have 4 staff, now we have 5,
right,
on the couple things I mentioned.
Including insurance companies.
Oh, yes.
Big problem, right?
I'm a former trial lawyer. I've sued many of them.
Kent, last word.
Well, we should remember to thank Lyndon for Medicare and Medicaid, although he ended his administration with Vietnam, because a lot of people know he started. He also got a lot of things done. With respect to the war on poverty, legal aid comes from neighborhood legal services. That was one of the programs that they started. And they started community action organizing, got a response back from Congress. So they were quite active. When Nixon was elected, he transferred the Office of Economic Opportunity, War on Poverty, to 2 unknown guys, new guys in his administration called Cheney and Rumsfeld, and they withdrew from that work.
Well, thank you. Let's give a good round of applause.
I'm sorry. I had one person who wanted to ask a question through the Zoom, but we don't have that ability to do it. So she was able to get a question typed in. So let me just read it real quick. I have a friend who is at Hazleton in Virginia. He is serving mandatory minimum of 15 years for recent offense that would have gotten 5 years if not for mandatory minimums. None of his offenses have been violent. Do you have any suggestions for getting rid of mandatory minimums?
Well, I think that there is actually bipartisan work being done in Congress to limit mandatory minimums because of the understanding on the history of them through the war on drugs and how it's turned out. And so you see we're in our biggest partner on all of our criminal justice stuff is the Koch brothers. I mean, it's the only thing we agree on, but we do. And we have they come at it from an economic point of view. We come at it from other points of view, but we're all at the same point, which is the current criminal justice system has deep systemic inequalities. And one of those inequalities are things like the use of mandatory minimums for nonviolent offenders doesn't make any economic and legitimate penologic sense. And so I think to get involved in politically is the only thing I can suggest. Once they're in place, there is, even though the law changes, most times then that law changes, it's prospective in nature, not retrospective, not retroactive. And so the benefit doesn't result back to the person who's already been sentenced. But on a rare occasion, you can have a law that is prospective and retroactive if the Virginia legislature, for example, did that, or if Congress did that. So working in that vein is helpful. The other thing to be helpful is to increase gubernatorial use of clemency and pardons, which is discretionary and is often very much underutilized. This governor in North Carolina, for a number of good things he's done, has been very reticent to use clemency and pardoning. In fact, Mike Easley used it more. And so that's an opportunity, and COVID gave some of that opportunity of getting out more elderly inmates who were in under deep sentences, who were costing the state an enormous amount for health care, and at 75 or 80 years old weren't going to go rob another bank. And so there is that use.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Very, very appreciated. It's time for announcements. Reminder that Fred wants you to order t-shirts and Chris is going to send out an email. Is that right? Good. Other announcements? Blue.
Just an FYI, some people were talking about the Sunday Assembly last week. They're meeting next Sunday. Their website on the meetup.
Okay, thank you.
Issues here. Just to let you know, we will not be meeting in person here next Sunday. Do not come in person. So the June 12th and June 19th are both Zoom only meetings. Next Sunday actually is going to be a video and a discussion. We'll send you out the details tomorrow. And the following Sunday is the day after the Moral March in Washington. Some of us are going to that. And so we're going to have a discussion about how it was and what we thought and so forth. So that's what's coming up. Both Zoom only.
And it seems that if we also have participants going to the March for Our Lives next week in Raleigh, that would fold in as well with that. I think the timing is ready for our happy hour at the Hickory Tavern on Wednesday from 6 to 8. Please join us if you can. It's attached to the Hampton Inn in Carborough. So it's by the old Art Center. Any other announcements? Okay. I did want to thank all of our volunteers for today. We had a tag team for refreshments, and they have been provided by Marge and John, and Ben and Mel, and Gretchen. So thank you to everyone for that. Thank you to Fred for opening and closing words. And thank you for Jean Rick for being our greeter with backup from John. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Fred for our closing words.
All right, so I have some pleasant thoughts for closing words from one of Shakespeare's most despicable villains, Caliban in The Tempest. Be not afeared, the isle is full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices. And if I then waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and shower riches, ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again.
Okay, so wrapping it up. Oh, okay.
I just have a very brief comment. I'm going to steal that from you for a second. Rick's apologies for rushing out. He had another appointment. Actually, his appointment was to go swimming with his granddaughter. It's a standing thing. So just wanted to let you know he really appreciated and apologize for leaving quickly.
Our meeting is over, but our fellowship continues as well as our eating. So join us for refreshments. Please give a warm greeting to the person adjacent to you, and we'll see you next week.